Okay. All right, so thank you everyone for joining. Again, welcome to our BDPA Tech and Career Talks. I'm Devin Jenkins with GE Healthcare in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I work in our supply chain digital technology organization as a senior technical product manager, and I lead our national BDPA Tech and Career Talks. So glad to have everyone here today. As a reminder, we do have the chat that is available for you to use throughout the call. So drop your questions, any comments or thoughts you may have as we go along. And we will make sure we address them at the end. Everyone is muted right now. I will allow everyone the opportunity to unmute if you would like. I'm at the end for our Q&A portion. If you would like to come off mute and ask questions, if you don't want to come off mute, you can drop your questions in the chat, and I'll ask them on your behalf as well. So just a little bit about BDPA for those who may be unfamiliar. BDPA is Black Data Processing Associates. Was started in 1975 as an organization focused on taking IT professionals from the classroom to the boardroom. So it's a forum for professionals already in the industry to connect and continue to develop in their careers, but also an opportunity for us to connect with young people and continue to build the diverse talent pipeline of those who are interested in this field and preparing them with computer skills and things they need to thrive in this industry. So today we have Emily Depasse with BlueGranite, who is a senior solution consultant there. This is the second in our three-part series with BlueGranite around data and analytics. So we are glad to have Emily in a follow-up to Ryan Wade, who was our last speaker, kind of setting the tone for us around modern data analytics. Emily is here today with us to share around data visualization principles and best practices. So we're glad to have Emily with us today. Emily is a data engineering professional with experience implementing data and analytic solutions end-to-end since 2013. She seeks to use data warehousing and business intelligence to solve problems and create new capabilities. With a unique combination of technical aptitude and business consulting experience, Emily carefully accounts for key business objectives when designing and implementing systems. So we are glad to have Emily with us today. I am going to allow Emily to unmute, and I am going to stop sharing so you can take over.
Thanks, Devin. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. It actually looks like you might need to allow me to share my screen.
Okay. All right, try it now.
That'll work. Okay. So yeah, Devin introduced me perfectly. I've been kind of working in the field of data and analytics for almost 8 years. And I've done both sides. I've worked on the data engineering side and also with data visualization. And I really enjoy both. But what I particularly like about data visualization is that while it includes logic and analytical thinking, it also allows me to flex my creative muscles a little bit. And so today I kind of want to talk about the principles of data visualization and some best practices, but through the lens of storytelling. I'm sure many of us have heard this metaphor before of let the data tell a story. And so I want to kind of share some practices in storytelling and relate that to data visualization. Like Devin said, please feel free to use the chat while I'm presenting if you have thoughts or want to kind of share ideas amongst yourselves. I will not be monitoring the chat while I present. That's just one skill I don't have, is being able to kind of manage reading the chat as well as sharing my slides, but I will definitely leave time at the end for Q&A, and I'll catch up on the chat at that time. And yeah, so I just look forward to sharing ideas with you all today. So when we think about this concept of storytelling with data, I think about data visualization as being more of an art than a science. And with that, really everything that I want to share today, given that it's more of an art than a science, I hope you don't take anything that I share as a hard and fast rule, but really some guidelines and ideas that I've kind of gathered over the years and by reading, some of the expertise that's out there. But there's 4 real recommendations that I want to share today about storytelling with the data. And that is to first plan the story that you're trying to tell. Then to tell the story, but let the data speak for itself. Third, know your audience. And finally, use all of the tools at your disposal. And so I want to go through these 4 recommendations, and I've created some example data visualizations to illustrate my ideas using data from Olympic Games, so many years of past Olympics results. And it was fun for me. I hope I'm not the only one here that's really looking forward to and hoping that we can successfully enjoy the Summer Olympics this summer. So with that said, let's start off by thinking about planning the story that you're trying to tell. So I'm no author, but I'm sure that authors are typically creating a plan when they start to write their story. They're not opening up their computer and typing chapter 1 and beginning with their first sentence. They may think things through, like, what is my plot going to look like? Who are the characters I'm including? How are they related? And things like that. And so data visualization, it's the same way. You know, the first thing that I'm doing if I start working on building a report is I'm actually not in a data visualization tool. I'm likely looking at my data source and trying to understand my data set as a whole. I may even create a mock-up using pen and paper and try to draw out what types of visuals I might want to use. But really, I'm thinking about what is the story that I want to tell? What are the questions that I want to be able to answer with my data? And then from there, I'll think through, how do I want to share this information? What is the order that makes the most sense if we're moving from a visual to the next visual? Do they tie together? Do they get more detailed as we go? Things like that. And then finally, for each individual visual component, there are many different ways that you can present information. And so there are some kind of considerations and thoughts to go through about how I want to, which method I want to use to present that information. So as an example, I have 3 different visuals here that are all presenting the exact same information. They're showing the number of gold medals that every country has won in the 2014 Olympics. And so let's say the questions that I want to answer, the story that I want to tell, is number 1, who won the most gold medals in 2014? Who won the least gold medals in 2014? And then as a follow-up, about how many times more medals did Canada win compared to Russia? Hopefully you can see the detail in the country codes on your screens. But if you think about those 3 questions, looking at these 3 visuals, which visuals make it easiest to answer those questions? So for me, if we start at the table on the left, I think tables can be very useful, but a couple of considerations. Number 1 being that the sort order in a table is super important. So maybe if I had sorted by the gold medal column rather than the country code, it would be a lot easier to identify the best and the worst in terms of gold medals in 2014. But if I did that, then really that visual wouldn't be too much different than my bar chart on the right. It just lacks that additional benefit of having a visual representation of my numbers. And so I think tables, can be very useful, especially if I have multiple text attributes that I can't visualize, or maybe if the values in my metrics, if the numbers are the precision of the numbers are very important to my audience, a table is a great way to display that. And of course, like Ryan mentioned, if you were on his talk, data analysis in Excel is not dead and won't be for a very long time. And I know that many folks love to export data and play with it in Excel. So a table is a great way to facilitate that as well for data analysis. Then if we move on to our pie chart, personally, I think it just creates a lot of noise and it takes up a lot of space and it doesn't really tell me a lot. If you've been around in the field of data and analytics or data visuals, you may know that pie charts are often a very polarizing concept in the world, because a lot of folks, myself included, think that pie charts are not an easy way for our brains to pick up information. And I would say, at least when it comes to this pie chart, the number of values that we're displaying really impacts our ability to read it and draw conclusions from the data. So I think pie charts, they can be a very useful way to show parts of a whole. They're a whole lot more useful when you have a small number of parts. And so in this case, I don't think I would choose the pie chart for this visual, which leads me to this bar chart on the right, which I think easily answers all three of the questions I outlined in the beginning. Who wins the most medal? Who won the most medals? Who won the fewest medals? And then even if we want to do some relative comparisons, taking those top two bars about how many more medals did Canada win compared to Russia, even if I don't look at the data labels, if I don't want to compare the numbers specifically, that Canada bar looks about twice the size of the Russia rectangle. And yeah, so those rectangles I think are a lot easier for me to compare rather than the slices in a pie. Now, that's not to say that bar charts are the end all be all. This next set of visuals I have comparing trending data. And so again, here we're showing the same information in three different ways. These are, I picked 3 countries and their medal counts, their total medal counts for every Summer Olympics, starting in '84. And so maybe the story that I want to tell here, I want to ask the question of which country has won the most medals over time? Is one country usually better than the others? And which countries have been getting better or worse over time? And so again here, starting with the table, it's a great way to show specific values if those are important to the user of your visual. But if I'm trying to detect trends, looking at a bunch of numbers in a box is not an easy way for me to draw conclusions. This table does have one benefit, I think, over the other 2 visuals, and then I can see this total column, so I can very easily see the US has won the most medals since 1984. But I think in its drawbacks in detecting trends rule it out for me for this type of visual. So that leaves the clustered bar chart or these line charts. And I think when we look at the bars, they do allow me to in a nice way, compare within a specific year. How did each country do compared to the others? I think it's a lot easier to detect that using the bars than it is using the lines. But if overall I want to look at something very quickly, draw a conclusion about who's been the best or how have things been trending over time, I think the lines win out there. So, I can very easily detect the USA line has been we've won the most medals since '96. Pretty easy to tell that, yeah, we're doing well that way. So after we think through planning the story that we want to tell, we're starting to make decisions about what questions do we want to answer, how do we choose the right visuals to answer them. I think it's also very important to keep in mind that we are telling a story here, but we need to let the data speak for itself. So back to our metaphor about telling stories. Stories are classified, they have all kinds of different genres, but first and foremost, they're identified as fiction or nonfiction. And so when we make visuals with data, yeah, we have to think about we are telling a story, but we don't want to influence what the data can say. Our job as designers of these visuals is to make it easier and faster to gain insights, but we don't want to influence the insights themselves. And while I'm sure there may be some scenarios where someone is designing a data visual and they actually do want to make their audience draw a specific outcome, I myself like to take the approach of as a nonfiction writer. in this sense. So I have created a couple of examples of ways that I might be able to be misleading in my data visuals. So we'll start off with this one, and I'll just let you guys take some time to look at this chart and see if there's anything tricky in here or something that might make the audience draw the wrong conclusions from this data. So if you look at the legend closely, I've used colors that are meaningful. I'm displaying medal counts from the 2008 Summer Olympics, and I've used a gold and a silver and a bronze color to denote gold, silver, and bronze medal counts. However, I swapped two of the colors. So if you look closely, the bar all the way on the left that looks like a golden color on my screen actually shows the bronze medal count. Silver is aligned with silver, but then that gold medal count looks like a bronze color. And so given that our idea is to try to make it easy and fast to draw these conclusions, it would be nice if we can save our audience some time so that they don't have to look at our legend very closely to think about, you know, what they're looking at on their screen. But we have to make sure that we get it right. So yeah, if someone looked at this closely, they might draw the conclusion that we won more, as the USA won more bronze medals than gold medals in 2008, but that's not the case. So yeah, I would change the colors back on this chart. And I would also probably put the gold medals all the way on the left. I think the order that the metrics are displayed in also, you know, we want to make things intuitive and follow kind of expectations that the audience might have. And this next set of visuals, I'm also showing the exact same information. That would be the average age of athletes by sport for Team USA in '96. And some of you may be able to spot the difference, why it looks on the left like our equestrian team is so much older than our baseball team, and our rhythmic gymnasts aren't even on the charts. And that's because on the left-hand side, I started my axis at 20, whereas on the right-hand side, I started my axis at 0. And I think there's absolutely a case for adjusting the axis range in visuals. It's a decision that developers should be able to make, but you have to, you know, keep in mind the context of the data that you're presenting. And for me, age is the type of measure that very much makes sense to start at 0. Just thinking about, yeah, the way that we perceive that information to make sure that we're not misleading our audience about the data that we're presenting. These two charts show exact same data again, and another way that we can manipulate the axis, which may or may not be misleading. If I'm looking at these charts, I'm thinking a lot of countries look a whole lot better on the top rather than on the bottom if we're comparing medal counts. And the reason for that is that the top chart, I've actually switched the medal count to use a logarithmic scale rather than a linear scale. And here, just like before, I think that is a decision that one can make that has very valid scenarios where it makes sense. When it comes to counting medals, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense, just with the way that we think about the number and the relative values that we're seeing. One specific example, I'm sure many of you, I mean, I guess we've all been looking at COVID dashboards for a whole year now. I have noticed that many of them use a logarithmic scale. I think that has to do with the nature of the disease and the way it spreads. So when you're looking at things like case counts, that can occasionally increase exponentially. A logarithmic scale makes that easier for us to perceive that information. But that's a whole lot different than thinking about medal counts. So after we plan the story that we're telling, we make sure that we're telling the truth, we're telling a true story. The next consideration that I think about is knowing our audience. And so authors, when they write a story, they think about their audience, absolutely. Children's books will have a content, language, and pictures specifically meant to educate or entertain children, whereas political biographies have a totally different set of content or writing style, again, tailored specifically to their audience. So I think knowing your audience and even collaborating with certain members of your audience as a professional in this field is super critical. One, to help them drive the story that you're trying to tell. Again, those questions that you want to be able to answer with your data. But there's also components I think that are not discussed as much, which is thinking about accessibility and also thinking about cultural differences, both in perceiving different colors, the direction that we read. But to start with accessibility, I myself am not colorblind, but I wanted to be able to see what that might look like to someone with red-green color blindness if I create a visual that almost exclusively uses the colors red and green to share my information. So I created this map visual. Now, I don't think this is a very useful or informative visual for the data specifically, but I think it illustrates the concept here. What the colors on this map are showing would be the medal count for the 2004 Summer Olympics and the kind of the saturation of the color, either red or green, would show the count as a scale. So countries with the highest number of medals are closer to green, countries with the fewest medals are closer to red, and there's some kind of brownish colors in the middle. And I don't have any other context on my page at all. I have a title, but I don't have any labels. Yeah, that's it. So I found a simulator online where I entered this image to see what someone with red-green color blindness might see. And this is what I saw. So I don't know if anybody on the call experiences this themselves, that they may be able to comment if they could perceive anything at all from my first picture. But I know that I can't. This picture to me is meaningless. I can't gather any information or draw conclusions. So I have seen some expertise, some guidance saying that if one wants to use this red-green diverging color scheme, switching it to blue and orange usually means that more people will be able to perceive those differences. But I also try to make sure if I am ever using red or green, or really any color for that matter, to be meaningful, that it's not the only item on my visual that shares that information. I have other context, either of a specific value, a data label, a text description, something like that, so that more folks will be able to, kind of perceive the story that I'm trying to tell here. And there's also thinking about red and green. Our culture, our money is green, so we associate green with good and red with bad, but that's not the case in every culture. I know at least in China, they often associate the color red with prosperity and fortune. So it's just, again, something to think in mind, that depending on who the audience is and for our data visuals, we might make different decisions to make sure that they're kind of on the same page in what we're presenting. Like I said before, we also want to keep in mind how a culture might read, the direction that they might kind of perceive our information. So to illustrate this, I made a dashboard for Team Canada. They were the home team in 2010 when they hosted the Vancouver Winter Olympics. And so knowing that in Canada, they read from a Z pattern, which I've illustrated here. They read from the left to the right and the top and down. I specifically chose different visuals based on the order that the audience's eyes will probably see them. So first thing, we're going to see the title and the medal count. So if that's all the time that I spend looking at this, I at least can pick up how many medals of each type that Team Canada has won. And then I wanted to go into kind of which sports are doing well and not well for Team Canada. So I have this chart showing the sports where the highest proportion of their participants won a medal versus the sports where we had the most participants without winning any medals. And then I went into tables with a little bit more detailed information, which has the Canada's data presented with some other top competitors. And then finally, a super detailed table at the very end that just outlines every athlete that's won a medal, which event did they win it in, and which medal did they win. So then I try to think about a culture that might be reading this in a different direction. And so I'll kind of flip the arrows a little bit. And this is hard for me to think through because I can't know what I don't know, but let's say this, I was creating a dashboard for an Eastern culture that reads from the right to the left instead. They might pick up different information in a different order. And so this would be a scenario if I had audience members who read in different directions. I might work with them, collaborate with them to try to, decide which makes the most sense. Where do their eyes go when they view the page? And how can we make a set of data visuals, the best for them to be able to pick up on that story that we want to tell. So after we've planned, we make sure we're letting the data speak for itself. We're considering who our audience is. Finally, we want to use all of the tools that are at our disposal. So just like authors writing stories have lots of levers to pull, they can have characters and villains. They use chapters, maybe with cliffhangers and other different plot elements to tell the story and make it engaging. We also have many different levers we can pull to make our stories land with our audience. And I think you've seen lots of examples so far already. So we can use color to enhance meaning as well as just make it more visually appealing. We can choose different types of visuals to display and aggregate and summarize our data, whether those are charts, tables, maps, scatter plots, and so many more. For those individual components, there are also different features that we can customize, like what the axes look like, whether we include data labels, how we orient the chart on our page. We can use white space. We have negative space between and around visuals that help make, pull the whole thing together. I'm sure if we try to squeeze a bunch of different visuals to try to share all kinds of information on a single page, we might think that, oh, this is great because we can present a lot of information, but is it really noisy? Is it hard for someone to actually perceive information? Those are all good things to think about. We can also use titles. Titles are really one of my pet peeves, I think, for data visuals, is I want to include them. I want them to be very clear, and I want someone to know exactly by reading my title what they're looking at. And then finally, we have interactivity. So at BlueGranite, we are a Microsoft partner, so we specialize in Power BI as a data visualization tool. But all tools really have this feature of interactivity where you can click on an item on your screen and that might filter something else, or it might make something happen on your page. And that is, these are just features to think about to enhance, again, the ability to understand the story that we want to tell. But I guess my final takeaway really that I want to leave you is to just never forget the purpose of data visualization. We want to make it easy for our audience audience to understand what's happening in the data, to draw conclusions, to be able to take action and make decisions. There's all kinds of amazing technology, and it's easy to kind of get caught up in making something flashy or cool or beautiful. And that is all well and good, but we want to make sure that number one, everything that we create is useful, in addition to being modern and beautiful. So that's mostly all that I have today. I also wanted to share a couple of resources that I find kind of to be very popular and very useful. If this field is something that interests you, these two books go a lot more in depth into some of these concepts of displaying information and designing dashboards and reports. Yeah, but please, yeah, if you have any questions, I'll be able to monitor the chat in just a second. And thanks everybody for your time.
Thank you, Emily. We did have a question from Lawanzer in the chat earlier. Do you still want to ask that question, Lawanzer? You can come off mute if so.
Yeah, I guess so. Emily, could you tell us a little bit more about suggested or preferred technology to provide you with the visualization charts and graphs that you shared with us today?
Yeah, everything that I built today, I built using Power BI. And so at BlueGranite, that is what we used in the solutions that we deliver with our clients, mainly because it's a Microsoft tool and we are a Microsoft partner. I know that there are other tools out there, like Tableau is a very popular one, and ClickView. And really, Microsoft Excel also has a lot of capabilities itself.
Well, about Power BI, I've heard of it, but of course I've never used it. In my day, I did a lot of graphing because I came from out of chemistry, engineering, and I worked industrially before I, went into the IT field. And so graphing, charts, and all that sort of thing was hugely important. To have visuals in our work, and I'm saying that to ask the question, with Power BI, what sort of utilities, functions, or tools within that platform give it an advantage or more customized use compared to some of the other software that you've used in the past?
That's a very great question. So I think, well, when it comes to Power BI, its advantages span beyond data visualization specifically. And I truly am not enough of an expert to be able to go, I think, really into it, but the Power BI product team is developing all kinds of features to make it more of kind of a very robust tool in terms of data management and analytics and visualization as a whole. They're even adding AI features, and yeah, there's a whole list of things, but gosh,
hey,
I don't
Emma,
know that I know enough to say why Power BI is better than others. Dan, do you have anything?
I can help out as well.
yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Okay, so with there's many reasons why I think Power BI would be a perfect solution for you in that situation. We have a person on our team, Kobe, who is a data scientist, and he's also and I can't pronounce this term correctly, genomics. Did I say that correctly, Emily?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And he has a PhD in that field, and he has worked a lot with the SARS virus and also with the COVID in terms of building models that will predict how the COVID-19 situation would play out. And some of his visualization, he used Power BI. And one of the reasons why Power BI will be a great tool for a scientist is that it has built-in tools inside of Power BI that allows you to get your data in the proper shape that it needs to be in for your data visualization. A lot of times, a lot of tools, you may be able to do the data visualization in the tool, but the data wrangling that you need to do in order to get your data in a proper shape from the raw data to the shape it needs to be in for the visualization is a process that you need to do outside of the tool. But Power BI allows you to do it inside of that. In addition to that, as Emily mentioned, it's customizable. Microsoft gives you the ability to build your own custom visuals. If you know Java, I believe the language is underneath the hood. You can correct me, Dan, on this. Like there are tools you can use in order to build custom visualizations in Power BI that's specific to your needs. And last but not least, Power BI, unlike I think more so than Tableau and other visualization tools, has a good integration of the Python and R programming languages inside of it. So if there is a thing that you cannot do within your visualization in Power BI, you can leverage R, which is a popular programming language that is used by data scientists and engineers. That more likely there may be a package out there, a data viz package that was developed in our community that you can leverage inside of Power BI to help you with your data visual needs. So to sum everything up, Microsoft has done a great job to give you most of the tools you need in order to build out a data visualization. And for some reason, one of those tools, one of the features that you need are not already built into Power BI, you can leverage programming languages like R and Python inside of Power BI to help you develop the custom visualization that you need.
Okay, thanks. I was just wondering about that. So it sounds like, you can have some add-on libraries in which you can use programming languages like R and Python, Java, even object-oriented programming languages to allow you to do customization with added libraries that are integrated. Okay, yeah, that's interesting to know. That's the information that I was trying to get at. Appreciate your answer.
Thanks for being here and joining us on this call. And you, Dan, is there anything else you need to add that I missed?
Well, I think, Power BI is really just the evolution of what Microsoft has been doing with their whole analysis suite, right? So it really is kind of the next SQL Server analysis server. The development tool has that built underneath it. So I think you guys covered it.
Okay.
Thanks for the question, Lawanzia, and thanks for your insights, Ryan, Dan, Emily. Do we have other questions? Anyone?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Camille Little. I'm currently a first-year PhD student in electrical engineering at Rice University, and I'm trying to sort of navigate the art of creating visualizations for both academic writing and academic talks that I'm learning how to prepare. And so I just kind of wanted to get your take on, I guess, when giving a talk and showing a figure, sort of understanding the use of like captions and or other text on like a slide that you may have. So, you have a figure, like how much do I, how much explanation might I put on a slide along with that figure, or do I caption that figure and try to explain there? Yeah, so just trying to understand that a little bit more would be helpful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that you make a great point that the context of where someone is kind of consuming this visual matters. So, you know, in my career, I'm used to kind of building dashboards made for people at work trying to, you know, they're looking at the same thing week after week and or day after day, hour after hour, and seeing how the figures are looking with, you know, the most recent data. So in that context, they might not need as much kind of annotation or description because they're used to the visuals, whereas what you're describing kind of in an academic context or sharing a figure for the first time to an audience who hasn't seen it before, they might need a little bit more description and information. So I guess I don't have a succinct answer, but I would consider that without, and you know, if you're putting something up on a piece of paper or on a screen, making it visual, can someone look at that alone and understand what it's trying to share if they, you know, if they don't have the benefit of hearing, you know, what you're saying to describe it? If maybe a photo is passed around after the fact, making sure that the message and the kind of the visual is very clear in what it's explaining. So I would probably err on putting extra annotations. I don't think there's really a too much in terms of explaining what a graphic might be showing.
I'd like to add to that, Camille, too. I think there's some fascinating stuff out there. I had a training once that was specifically geared towards online presentation, and it raised the point, and I don't know if you could find more detail on this if you wanted to head down this path, but apparently when we read, this was new to me, and this is something I never thought of. When we read something, we're hearing it inside of our head. So if you are presenting to an audience that's sitting there and listening to you, the more text you have on your visual, the less they will hear what you are saying. So that's one of those things that when you see slides that are really dense with a lot of text explaining stuff, you're going to have a hard time being heard because your audience is going to be reading those words in their head and not necessarily hearing you. I don't know if that makes sense, but I always thought that was just fascinating to me that, and I've seen it in person, you know, so it's always that balance of how much do I annotate so somebody understands what they're looking at and can look at after the presentation, you know, in a slide deck or something versus as I'm presenting it live.
Yeah, so to piggyback off of what both Emily and Dan has just said, one of the books that Emily showed is a book by Stephen Few. And one of the things that Stephen Few, one of his big principles is that you should be very stingy with what you put in your visualization. One of the things he says is white space is good. A lot of times with data visualizations, we think that as a dashboard developer, we need to cover every inch of that dashboard with some type of visual. When, you know, in doing that, that can create a visual that's too busy and hard to understand. And you may make it hard to give the end user ability to make a decision based off of the information that you're giving him or her. So with that being said, with annotations, you can do an annotation like you mentioned, which is important, but also you can do things like color. You can use color. Like say you had a situation where you were displaying the using a horizontal bar chart to show the metals by country, and you wanted to specifically point out a country within that group of countries. Well, one of the things you can do is use color instead of annotation to highlight the country that you want to use. So with that being said, I think that you can do a combination thing. You can use annotation, and you may need to use more annotation if it's a visual that you just handed over to someone without giving them you know, a context behind it, you know, through talking them through it. Or if you're gonna do a live presentation, you probably want to use less annotation so you won't fall into that trap that that Dan just mentioned.
Awesome. Those are all very helpful answers. I appreciate that so much.
And that's Stephen Few. That's even your friend Hadley Wickham. Stephen Few is one of the guys that that he listened to. You look at the GG themes, Stephen Few and Edward Tufte, they have a theme for each one of those data viz experts. So that should give you some context around how important those guys are in the data viz community.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great
Hi,
question,
how's
Camille.
everyone today?
Go ahead, Greg. We hear you and we see
All
you.
right, awesome. My name is Greg Flowers. I am a data engineering professional with Microsoft, and I am also working with marketing within BDPA. And I just want to say thank you all for the space today. This is my first tech and career talk, and I've learned a lot. Thank you, Emily, for your time today. One of the things I wanted to talk about was, firstly, Power BI. I have a little bit of experience with it, both personally and professionally. Power BI, as Ryan and Dan elaborated, has lots of filtering and for the extracting process with data. It does a very good job of allowing you to do things like aggregations and pivots, as well as even a bit of scripting once you actually ingest the data into Power BI. So the Power BI is very good for shaping the data, as Ryan talked about, wrangling with the data before you're able to visualize it. One of the things that you mentioned, Mr. Quincy, if I'm saying your name correctly.
Quincy Jones got the Y. I'm just a Quince.
Okay, Mr. Quince was
Yes.
that Power BI does allow third-party libraries. That's one thing I love about the Microsoft architecture. So there was a case where we were exploring user engagement for a mobile application, and I was able to download a third-party sunburst chart. And a sunburst chart is very similar to a pie chart, and it also allows you to have the layer or the flow of the data from the center of the circle all the way out to the exterior part of the circle. You can color coordinate as well as have number visualizations there. Another thing that, so Power BI is a great tool. Also using Power BI, I found a few limitations there. And one of the limitations was that in one case, I was visualizing some data that was using graph and nodes. So it was graph data. And I found a third-party library. It was a JavaScript library that I was able to integrate into a React app. And this library allowed me to actually manipulate the nodes. So you could grab the nodes and separate them to create a new structure of your graph. There were some other libraries that allowed you to select different presets that would reorganize the graph for you. But in this case, this particular JavaScript library allowed you to basically drag and drop the nodes into new locations and create a custom visualization there. And so Power BI is great, but it's also great to go explore the new libraries that are made out of scripting languages like Python and JavaScript. I want to comment a little bit on the presentation that Emily gave, and thank you. I learned a lot about the storytelling part. One question I had was, are there cases where you could use motion or video to express the story, especially when you're sharing or telling a story about data that over time intervals? Over large time intervals. And one thing that I think about is like a weather forecast, how when you look at the rain and they give you the forecast from like 8 a.m. that day to about 8 p.m. that night, and you can see the graph of the rain flowing over the map. So that was the question. When are cases where we could use motion and video to better storytell?
Yeah, that's a great comment and question, Greg. I have Power BI does have this functionality, I'm sure, as other tools have as well. And frankly, I just didn't, it would have been a little bit tricky to incorporate that into a PowerPoint to share today. But yeah, I think using like motion video, like you said, to show trending can be very useful. You can see how data points are changing over time. And yeah, it's again, as long as the audience is aware of how the visual works, and consuming the visual in a way that they can interact with it and use the video on a computer, then yeah, I think it's a super useful tool.
One thing I want to respond to or ask Greg Flowers. He mentioned something about nodes and some of the visualizations. So it sounds like to me you have underneath all of it the technology, data structures, and with those data structures you have trees where you can use technologies like Java, object-oriented programming, C++, as well as Python to do the programming for customization to get more customized visualizations. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, it is. And in this particular case, we were dealing with a very large data set. So we were in the big data space. And what we did was we took a subset of that data. So we exported just a piece of it and ingested it into our application. And it did have an underlying tree structure.
Your trees, you have circular trees, double with linked lists, and you can traverse across them, do searches, insertions, deletions, all that sort of thing, just like with a binary tree structure.
Absolutely. In our case, we scoped our project to where the data was already shaped, and it was my job to visualize the data. But exactly what you're saying was a linked list, the way we ingested it. And most of the insertions and deletions had been done before the data, before I received the data to visualize it.
Okay, all right, then that's good to know for future reference. Thank you for filling me in with those details.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Do we have one more question? We have 3 minutes left, so make sure we give the opportunity. Okay, well, if not, I do want to make sure I share our website with you all. So the recording will be available on our website, bdpa.org/tech and career talks. And that's tech, the letter N, career talks. I just put that link in the chat. Our tech talks are on YouTube now. So if you go to the site, you won't see the usual table that's been there, but you'll actually see our clips from YouTube. So nice layout there, and thanks to the team for making that happen. So go on the website, the recording will be there soon after the call ends. If you want to go back and see this or share with anyone, you want to see the slides again, what have you. Thanks again to Emily from BlueGranite sharing with us in our second of a 3-part series around data analytics being presented by BlueGranite. Our next talk will be March 26th, and we will glad to have Megan Quinn and Tom Waynandi. I hope I'm saying Tom's last name right, but we're glad to have Megan and Tom from BlueGranite to close out our series on data analytics, talking about a day in the life of a data scientist and data engineer. So we look forward to seeing you again 2 weeks from now. Be on the lookout for the registration link so we can get it going again. But any last words from you, Emily or Dan with BlueGranite before we close?
Well, I put in the chat. I mentioned last time that we are hiring. And then from our staff meeting this morning, I would say we are aggressively hiring. We definitely need people from all levels. So if you're looking to move or considering moving into consulting for the type of stuff that we do, don't think that it just has to be senior high level stuff. We're looking for entry level as well. People that are willing to learn and can learn and want to jump into this field as it blows up around us. So I threw the information in the chat. You guys are always welcome to hook up with me on LinkedIn if you have questions. Ryan's there as well. I think Emily's on there as well. So we're just trying to reach out and share information about a field that we're really excited to be in. So we're always willing to talk about it. Thanks, Devin.
Thanks for sharing those opportunities, Dan. Please take advantage of that. He did drop the link in the chat if you want to look into some of the career opportunities BlueGranite has to offer in the data and analytics space. Please take advantage of that. So I won't hold you any longer. We are at time. Thank you again, Emily. Thank you all for joining. Stay safe, and we will see you again in a few weeks.